We make such snapshot, we shouldn't, but we do. We make such snapshot decisions about people, and that happens, believe it or not, within the first 7 seconds. In fact, within 1/10 of a second, we decide whether or not somebody is trustworthy.
Psychologist, author, model and former fitness instructor Denise O'Dwyer, thank you so much for joining us in Garry Talks.
In my head, I was like much heavier than what I was. And I was very critical, very, very critical. So the inner critic was alive and well throughout that time, for 15 years.
Which kind of stemmed from childhood.
Yeah.
This is a GK Media podcast.
Psychologist, author, model and former fitness instructor Denise O'Dwyer, thank you so much for joining us in Garry Talks.
Thanks, Garry. Delighted to be here.
I'm looking at the book here. I should say Dr. Denise O'Dwyer, so forgive me. We're going to talk about your book, Psychology with a Sparkle, and it gives us really the bones of everything that we're going to talk about in the interview, because it's not just psychology you talk about, but you talk about, your life and your childhood. And I was saying to you when you came in earlier today that I love the idea of reading, but I don't allocate enough time for myself during the week to read. Sure. And I just flew through this book when I was over in Italy there during the Easter midterm break, and I loved it. And I ended up running off, getting a yellow highlighter and highlighting all these bits that were really resonated with me. And it's an easy read. There's a book I'm reading at the moment. It's a well-known book for people looking to get into business or for entrepreneurs, whatever. But there's times where I'm having an outer body experience where I can see my eyes glazing over because it gets so waffly and it doesn't hold my attention. This is a great read. It's easy to fly through. There's bits that you can do it in sections. And also, after reading it, I said, I know when I come back reading this book, I'll need a different coloured highlighter because there'll be other parts that'll resonate with me as I go through. So congratulations.
Thanks very much.
On your book.
Garry.
And what I loved about it as well is you talked about your excitement of getting the book deal.
Yeah.
I felt I was with you on that journey, which is cool.
Yeah.
And this idea as well of psychology with the sparkle. I mean, you say it as it is. You're not trying to go down the route of the old school formal style of psychology. You're bringing your own personality with it. And that, again, is so important for us all to embrace as people, our own personalities, and to be who we are and shine through.
Exactly. I suppose that was, as you say, that was quite deliberate, because there is kind of quite a set style when it comes to psychology in terms of, the written word in particular. And I didn't want to be kind of confined by that. And I suppose by adding the sparkle piece, I was able to kind of, as you say, express those creative parts of me. Because, obviously, I've been hugely inspired by psychologists and all things psychology related, not least of all my clients over the years. But equally, there's lots of other things, I suppose, that I wanted to capture in the book. And I felt it would be too limiting if I kind of went down the traditional academic route. So,
yeah, like even, I wouldn't say basic things, but things we take for granted that are so important is even just how we dress and the effect that has on us. So like naturally, when I'm doing the podcast, I always try and look presentable and wear some snazzy words. Well, when I say, snazzy is not the right word, but when I'm wearing a shirt. But usually I'm a lot more laid back in the
Garry.
office.
Snazzy shirt.
But like a little thing, like I'm wearing shoes that I bought before for a wedding, as opposed to wearing tracksuit bottoms and runners, which was the style that we all got into during COVID.
Absolutely.
Which kind of had a knock-on effect, which you talk about as well in the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I suppose I've always kind of been fascinated by the psychology of fashion, and that was kind of why I wrote a full chapter on it. Because we do, as you say, like we express so much through our clothes, and it's so important that you dress kind of appropriate to the occasion, whatever it is you're doing, so that you're going to be comfortable, but also that you're going to, put your best foot forward. Because clothes, and this has been shown like through studies and through, interviewing some of, the most famous designers the world over, that clothes, they not only have an impact on our own psychology and, how we feel about ourselves, but also the impact, you know, the non-verbal impact that they have on every single person that we meet. And like, you know, we make such snapshot, we shouldn't, but we do, we make such snapshot decisions about people. And that happens, believe it or not, within the first 7 seconds. In fact, within 1/10 of a second, we decide whether or not somebody is trustworthy. And that has been, like, that's been shown through actually a research study in Princeton University. So like, the impact of, you know, how we present ourselves, like, is massive and hugely underestimated, I suppose, that there is that whole psychology piece behind, you know, if you've got a particular business meeting, you want to really smash it, and you know, you might go for like a bit of masculine tailoring just so that you have that little bit of extra oomph coming from within, you know, and also with like feminine touches added to that so that you still feel like a female, you know. And equally for guys, like, you know, if you think about the likes of, you know, even Donald Trump, like the way he used to always wear his red tie, and that, you know, very much signified the dominance and the, you know, the way he kind of, his style of leadership. So there's a huge, as I said,
because colour plays a role as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. The psychology of colour and, you know, even for interior design, like that impacts hugely in terms of like whether you want a more zen atmosphere or you want to kind of liven things up. So there is, you know, I always think like clothes, they're kind of like a non-verbal way of speaking volumes, you know. And we can say so much, you know, and we can also use our clothes as armor, you know, if we want to kind of shy away into the background, we can use it for that effect as well. So there's so much to it. It's not just like a you know, a matter of kind of throw any old thing on. Well, you can do, and it means I suppose it's nice to have days off too, but equally that, you know, you do put that little bit of extra effort into, because it reflects, as I said, not only on how you think and feel about yourself, but also how you relate to others and how you're received by others. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when it came to that chapter, I thought, oh, this probably isn't relevant for me now. This is more focused on, you know, a female readership. But then as I was reading through it, there was so many things I was relating to. And unfortunately, the first time we met in person, I was wearing tracksuit bottoms.
Well, in fairness, I think I was probably wearing something similar. So
it was a Sunday. It was an afternoon. Calling up to your friends with a bottle of wine. And
exactly.
Chilled too much. But no, it was great to kind of catch up and have the chat.
Absolutely.
And it evolved to us meeting here today. Then in studio.
Which was fantastic. Yeah, absolutely.
Something that you talk about as well is imposter syndrome, and I think so many people have difficulty with this without even maybe realizing that they have imposter syndrome, but it's this whole thing of confidence and purpose and so on. And like, you've had different roles. As I said, you were a model, you were you worked in gyms, you're a fitness teacher and instructor and all that. And again, in the book, like, what I love is you make it clear that this journey that you've been on isn't straightforward, isn't easy. Again, if there's people listening, no matter what age you are, don't think you need to have it figured out right now in your life. And even if there's something you want to do, even if it takes 20 years to get there, that's okay too. But it is this thing of, I suppose, we end up in roles in life, and sometimes it's not where we intended to be. And then we wonder, should we be here?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, you know, so many people suffer, you know, I think we've probably all suffered from imposter syndrome at some point in our lives, but it has kind of very much come to the fore, I suppose, in recent years. There's a lot of talk about it on social media, and a lot of people are, you know, there's just a big focus on it. I think, as you say, because so many people have that, they can relate to that feeling of feeling misplaced, and also feeling kind of almost a sense of unworthiness, you know, in a particular life situation or in a particular life position. And generally what you'll find is that oftentimes the people who suffer the most with imposter syndrome, you know, where the inner critic is the loudest, you know, they can be people who have like master's degrees and PhDs, and, you know, when you actually kind of look for the evidence to support the imposter, there's none there, you know, but yet because of kind of programming from an early age and, you know, maybe limiting beliefs that we all develop over the years, you know, through listening to authority figures and whatever else, that we end up with all of these, you know, doubts, self-doubts. And it's that feeling of, you know, I'm going to be found out. You know, you might be in a really senior position or, you know, whatever, you might get a really lucky break, but you kind of feel like, oh gosh, you know, I'm going to be found out like any second or any moment. They're going to find out, you know, that I'm actually a fraud, you know. And it's to really kind of work on dismantling that belief system. That's oftentimes, I suppose, where psychologists and therapists come into play, to help people to dismantle that belief system and to help people to develop, you know, a healthier mindset and a healthier self-concept. And I suppose in psychology, that's really what we would refer to imposter syndrome as, you know, having a positive self-concept, you know, that you think more highly of yourself than you do, you know, the other extreme.
And then there's people who seem to do really well in life and they're, you know, they're kind of useless at what they do, but they have the gift of the gab and they just kind of get away with it. And imposter syndrome doesn't enter their thinking at all. You know? Yeah,
I think I make reference to, is it Charles Bukowski? I think he has a quote. It's something along the lines of, you know, it's always the fanatics who, you know, kind of believe that they're fantastic, as you say, and don't worry about anything. And then it's the people who are actually generally very talented and have a lot to offer, and they're the ones who are crippled with the most self-doubt, you know. So
I actually remember highlighting that paragraph in the book.
So you related to it, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot to go into in terms of how you because it was a long period of time with you know, working hard, saving money to go through, to be able to put yourself through college and to even have the opportunity to complete your studies and get your qualification. And even that wasn't easy. You know, it's very much a closed door situation in terms of getting the training and so on. But, you know, can you talk to people listening today about the struggles that you went through on that journey, you know? And I suppose if people are on that journey at the moment, just it's the reassurance that, you know, just to persevere and be patient.
Yeah, I suppose I kind of had my heart set on clinical psychology. That was kind of, you know, the route that I wanted to take. And I suppose everything that I sort of dreamed about and worked towards was with a view to doing clinical. And it kind of became almost obsessional in terms, and that's a lot of people who are on the clinical psychology trail, and they'll know exactly what I'm referring to if somebody's listening to. It can be a really arduous one and, you know, highly competitive and quite elitist actually. And many people will have had a similar experience and probably are having it today, you know, that I had, which is, you know, that it's so, now it's becoming better, thankfully, and just in the last couple of years, actually, there's more openings becoming available for people, but like very limited number of places in all the universities in terms of getting on doctoral programs, and it's just soul destroying, you know. And I talk about this in the book where, you know, rejection lights up the same part of the brain, you know, as the pain of a broken limb. Like turning up for interviews, giving it your best shot, making it to the final cut, and then being knocked on the last hurdle. And it's just soul destroying. And I suppose I did that for 3 consecutive years, where I would have applied to all the doctoral programs without success, but, you know, getting very close, but not quite making the final cut. And I just kind of decided, I had been working as a voluntary assistant psychologist under a clinical psychologist, and, you know, doing my part-time fitness instruction to keep myself in, you know, in money, in cash. And I was also working as a care assistant. So I was kind of doing a couple of jobs to keep myself going. And I just randomly kind of came across this ad in the newspaper and thought, sure, look at what have I got to lose, and went for the job, not really thinking anything, and ended up being appointed in an acting capacity. And at that point then I just decided I had submitted just one application for clinical training that year, but I decided to pull it because I just, in my heart of hearts, I kind of knew I'll get there somehow, but I'm not prepared to put myself through that process again, because there are other opportunities, there are other routes to take outside of Ireland. Like I went through the UK to do my doctorate, and I suppose at that stage, and that's not to knock in any way, not to knock the Irish system. Obviously, I always believe there's a reason for things not happening for us at a particular time in our lives, and I talk about that as well, I suppose, in the book, that it obviously wasn't my time. And, as it happened, I ended up working so I'm employed as principal psychologist with the National Learning Network, which is the training and education rehabilitation side of Rehab Group. And I loved my job, from the time I literally could see textbook cases coming to life in front of me, and I loved it. And I just thought to myself, no, do you know what? I'm going to work really hard and find another way around things. So I think, sorry, a very long-winded way of answering your question, Garry, but I suppose it's to have the tenacity to keep working towards whatever it is, to work towards your dream, but also to know when to step out of the ring as well. Like for me, it was time to kind of explore a different alternative,
Yeah.
That was just my personal experience.
And step out of the ring as opposed to throw in the towel.
Exactly. To kind of note that there are other alternatives, there are other options. And sometimes I think we can get very blinkered, in terms of like, there's only one way and one way only. But actually, you can kind of just jinx yourself in the process of, again, thinking in that kind of limited manner that it has to be the Irish system. Well, no, it doesn't actually. There's other ways and means of getting to where you want to get to. So it's to not give up on yourself and really kind of explore all alternatives and, keep working towards whatever it is, whatever the dream is, whatever the vision is, keep working towards it. And as you said, like a lot of things for me, not just like, psychology, but sometimes it just takes me that bit longer to get to wherever it is, because that's just my nature, I guess. Sometimes I kind of will go about things in a different way.
Yeah.
But I suppose I would always kind of feel like if there's something I really want, I will work really hard and I'll do whatever I need to do to achieve that.
Would you say that you were always positive in terms of your outlook and a strong mind?
I've always been positive, but I've always had that self-doubt. I had to kind of work really hard on overcoming had a lot of self-doubt, a lot of fears, even though like to the external eye, a lot of people would have kind of looked and thought, oh yeah, super confident, but actually I battled with a lot internally. So it took me a lot to kind of get to a place and a space where I felt truly kind of better about myself and kind of felt like I was putting my best foot forward and felt like I was really kind of working towards achieving my purpose and, what I was truly kind of designed, because I believe we all have a purpose in life, so it kind of, again, probably took me that bit longer to kind of figure things out and to develop a truly positive mindset, not so much in relation to everything around me or other people, but in relation to myself.
Yeah. And you talk about the outside and people seeing you as confident and so on. And I said at the start, that you were a model. I don't know, do you still model today?
Not so much.
Not as much.
No.
But then internally you had issues going on with body dysmorphia.
Yeah.
Can you explain to me what body dysmorphia is and what was that actually doing to you?
Yeah, well, I suppose firstly to point out, in case people think I was on the Paris or Milan catwalks, it was like I joke in the book that like at 5'4", I was never exactly going to be like an international runway model, but I did do part-time modelling over the years and I always loved it.
Are you wearing high heels there? Because you didn't look 5'4" when you came in.
No, I'm in runners today, but yeah.
You look taller than your
maybe
actual height is.
But so I did battle, as you said. I had I battled with body dysmorphia and
what is that?
And eating disorders. So it's a misperception of how your body looks. So, you know, you perceive yourself to look in a very different way to how others perceive you. But it was coupled with, I suppose.
So is that like shapes and size and stuff, is it?
Everything, yeah. So, you know, in my case, I suppose I just had what I would call a fat head. Like in my head, I was like much heavier than what I was. And just, you know, kind of had, I was very critical, very, very critical. So the inner critic was alive and well throughout that time, you know, for 15 years.
Which kind of stemmed from childhood, didn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, anybody who has suffered with eating disorders, body dysmorphia, the two kind of go hand in hand, to be honest. But they'll know the internal struggle that it's literally your every thought, you know, it's just, it becomes a source of complete preoccupation. Like everything is driven by what you have or haven't eaten, how much you have or haven't exercised. You know, it's just crazy town, like it really is, inside your mind. And again, it took me a while to figure out my way out of that. You know,
it was up to your 30s, wasn't it?
Yeah. So like it was, you know, and I suppose for everybody it's going to be different. For me, it was, you know, attending like positive support group meetings, having a very positive kind of inside circle, a relationship that, you know, where I was very supported by that person. I went to a specialised dietitian to help me in terms of the actual dietary side of things, things like meditation, prayer, journaling. You know, they were some of the things, exercise, but exercise in a healthy way as opposed to what I had been doing, which was like going around and around, you know, a football pitch, you know, with all that was in my mind was whatever I'd eaten the day before or the night before, or, you know, whatever the case was. Whereas, you know,
as in you're trying to punish your body.
It was all to do with like self-punishment and just really not feeling good about myself and feeling like I'd nothing else to offer other than how I looked. So,
okay.
You know, I think,
and at this stage, it probably becomes the norm for you that this is not, because you've been going through this mentally for so many years of your life that it's nearly, you accept it as this is you, this is normal, this is the real Denise as such.
Well, not so much. I think I always knew, and again, it's that, I suppose deep down, it was buried, but I did have that self-belief deep down. I knew that I had it within me to kind of get past all of that. But it was just, I was frustrated by the process, how long it was taking me and why I might have had, you know, like 2 weeks, 2 months, 3 months of reprieve where I'd be fine. But then bang, I'd self-sabotage again. And, you know, as psychologists, we look for what we describe as protective factors, which are the things that help somebody function within their dysfunction. And for me, that was, you know, that I'd always great friends. I was always like, you know, had really good pals, which, you know, and a lot of them are still very good friends to this day. And I was quite outgoing, despite the fact that, you know, there was all this stuff going on internally, but I was actually quite an outgoing person, you know, quite extrovert. But even that, like, because now I describe myself as kind of more, you know, extrovert / introvert, you know, so even then that was probably part of the front as well, you know, that I was kind of not comfortable with saying who I was, who I really was, or the struggle that was truly happening within, you know.
So it's like people in my boat who are trying to diet and lose weight and stuff, and sometimes you have a good period and then you fall back and it's bad and stuff. It's not that you woke up one day and it's like, okay, I know what to do and I know how to fix myself, you know, for want of a better word. It was an ongoing,
it was a process. Yeah, it really was a process. And, you know, like that, some things worked, some things didn't. And that's why I say to people, like, there's kind of no one size fits all. You have to kind of discover for yourself what works. you know, and again, even down to who you work with, if you decide to work with a psychologist or a therapist or a coach or whatever it is, that person, they need to work with you and for you. You know, there has to be that balance, and that connection needs to be right, because that's a fundamental part, because it's really like the food stuff and the body stuff, that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's the whole emotional struggle that's going on underneath as to why you know, because food is only just one substance. It could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be anything, you know, it's depending on the person involved. It could be, it's a drug of choice essentially. And a lot of the time what we're doing is we're suppressing emotion, you know, so you don't want to deal with the emotion, so you choose to engage in this addictive cycle, so that kind of almost you don't have to think. You actually don't have to think, because for that period of time that you're involved, you know, with whatever your drug of choice is, you know, it's just you and that drug, you know, and then the aftermath comes, you know, and that's where this criticism and the self-hatred and all of that comes in, and then the punishment cycle, and then it goes around the way again. So I would encourage anybody, you know, to try and get help at an early stage, because I suppose it was a good while into things before I decided to, you know, to get the right help, or to even realise that I had a problem actually.
And was there a breaking point that brought you to that realisation?
I think I just, I knew that I was getting worse as opposed to better, you know. I knew that, like, even though I kind of had myself convinced, sure, like, I can stop whenever I want, you know, sure, I can. But actually, every time I'd try to stop, or I'd have like that, a period of reprieve, I'd end up going back down the same route again, and then I'd be worse than ever again. So it was a really vicious cycle. And yeah, one that, if anyone is suffering, you know, do talk to your GP as the first point of contact, and try and get the help that you need, because, you know, it was very insidious for me, the way it crept up, you know, and then it just got worse and worse as time went on.
You talk about suppressing emotions, and it's something that I suppose is put on us as children, and, you know, if we become parents, you know, we put that onto possibly our own children as well. And a good example would be, you know, I have a 5-year-old that's bonkers, and you know, she just has tantrums, which I don't get, because her eldest sister had stopped that when she was like 2.5. And I'm aware of the neighbours next door, and I'm trying to tell her stop screaming, stop shouting, and trying to get her to suppress her anger, instead of acknowledging it, validating it, and then comforting her, which I'm learning and trying to implement now. But, you know, no one, as we always say, is given a manual when they walk out of a labour ward on how to raise a child, and you're working off instinct, and, you know, your intentions for the most part of people are good. But there is this thing where sometimes it's like trying to, you know, if a child is acting up, which is a phrase that is used, which is really just a child expressing their current emotion. Yeah. It's not that they're acting up, is we try to suppress it so it fits in with the norm of society's expectations. And that, unfortunately, can have a knock-on effect as well for people, because they learn that, I guess, I need to suppress this emotion to be within society's... You know, like, you can't be, you know, in your 40s just having a complete meltdown now in workplace. And
exactly.
But it is that thing of, you know, the more you suppress, well, then
the more aggressive it can kind of come
back. And it has a physiology effect, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it does, absolutely. And Gabor Mate, I don't know if you've come across his work, but he's done, like, exactly as you're talking about there, Garry, where, like, he describes that the body will actually have physical manifestations, you know, of things that are happening within, you know, if they're suppressed to that, you know, large extent, that we end up like that with illnesses and whatever else, because we're not dealing with our emotions, and because we all have traumas, you know, whether it's trauma with a capital T or a small t, we have stuff that has happened throughout our lives. And unless you actually deal with that and actually, you know, deal with your shadow side, you know, that like what you're saying, that to recognize that there's a place for all emotion, and our emotions are really like a spectrum, and oftentimes exactly as you've just described, we're taught from a very young age, you know, to suppress the negative emotions and, you know, highlight the positive ones. And here we are then, you know, in our adult lives, and we're doing the exact same thing. Yeah,
especially online, social and all that.
Yeah, exactly. So it's recognizing that it's actually really normal. It's part of the human condition to have every kind of emotion, but it's to be able to express the negative ones appropriately. You know, that, as you say, it's not, you know, you're not going to be able to just go into the workplace and start shouting your head off at people. You know, you have to be able to contain yourself to a certain degree, but to find an outlet for your anger or for your grief or for your sorrow or for your whatever, any of the emotions that would be considered kind of more negative, that, and to recognize that it's possible for all of our emotions to coexist and to actually complement each other. Because if we didn't feel the sad feelings or the angry feelings, then we wouldn't know what it's like to be happy, you know. So, but we're often afraid of them, like so afraid to have those negative emotions, you know.
Yeah, and it's great when people like you come into studio here and share their story as well, because again, there could be people listening where it really resonates with them and they can connect and relate, and you know, hopefully that'll be of help to them on their journey as well.
Yeah.
But you know, the more we normalize all emotions,
absolutely, and shine a light on it. Yeah.
Because it definitely is a thing, and I know it affects a lot of people. And like, you know, my eldest daughter keeps saying, "Oh, she wants to be a YouTuber," because she sees YouTube as the place where, you know, you make your millions and you become famous and
fast book.
It's all the wrong reasons at the moment that she wants to become a YouTuber, but she's turning it more now into just for highlighting the crafts that she's into, which is great.
Okay.
But it is that thing of always what goes up online are, you know, it's always the happy side, you know, and unfortunately when we're going for our escapism at the end of a long, possibly busy, hectic day, we're going to social media and we're seeing everyone's having an amazing time, and we've just had a rough, tough day, and you're probably feeling now more angry within.
Yeah,
you know, saying this is the life I've ended up with.
Yeah, and it is just to recognize that. I know everybody says it, but it's so true that is just the highlight reel, and that, you know, like you might be fortunate to have a shining moment, you know, at a particular time, but that is like literally a moment in time. That's not how somebody exists every day, you know. And I think sometimes you lose perspective on that because you just see those particular moments, you know, where somebody chooses not to, you know, share. And I'm guilty of it myself, you know. I like to keep my social media quite positive. I do try and shine a light on, you know, the more difficult aspects of human nature. But in general, you know, I try to kind of keep things as upbeat, I suppose, because I want to encourage people, and I want people, you know, for it to be an encouraging space.
Yeah.
But I am very much a proponent of the idea that, you know, we need to give expression to all of our emotions, you know, and find, if you're not comfortable, you know, you don't necessarily have to be discussing them on social media, but find an outlet to be able to let go of some of the negative emotion, you know, and that can be done through writing, you know. Like I joke, like, you know, I run, and some of my best cathartic moments have been when I'm out running, you know, because I can let go of a lot of things that are kind of swimming around in my head. But I find journaling is another great one. Meditation is fantastic, like, and there's been like loads of research to back that up as well. Meditation, mindfulness. So it's really just about sitting down, talking to a friend, you know, having a cup of coffee, somebody that you really trust and that you know they're not going to run to 5 people, somebody that you can truly be yourself and say what's going on. You know, that is so therapeutic, you know. Or, as I said, attending a psychologist formally or a therapist of your choice.
And I think even just having a cup of tea or a coffee with a friend, not doing it where you're going out for drinks at night.
Exactly.
Because I think it lacks that depth, and you know, it can easily be brushed on then to another subject. You never really get closure maybe on where you're hoping to take the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that's very good advice to kind of, if you can at all, to do it where there aren't stimulants involved, because like that. And then sometimes, you know, things can become unwieldy and you may end up talking about something completely different, or, you know, somebody ends up, you know, you end up being triggered by somebody, or they by you, or whatever the case is, you know, but those things tend to become more exacerbated when we have alcohol and stimulants on board. So you're right. If you can do it over a coffee, it's much better. And
we have to really look after our friends as well, so that they can look after us when we need, you know. Absolutely. Again, I think we're lucky when we go through, you know, when we're growing up and we have friends that we might play around with in the estate or something, wherever we grew up in our neighbourhood. And then you have friends through school, you might have friends through college. And then it all changes then when you're out of the education bubble as such, and you might be going into the workplace. And are these friends, or are they just friends because I'm working with them? You know, it mightn't have the same depth of a friendship that you would have with someone you grew up with, and you could be living in a different city, and you can lose contact with childhood friends and all this, as I'm sure many people have experienced. And I'm guilty of it myself, of not really, you know, maintaining some great friendships I had over the years because I got distracted with other things in life. But it's so important that we realize the value that has in our lives. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, you know, it's like what people say, as you go through life, your friendship circle usually gets smaller, but the friendships, you know, are deeper, and you probably, you know more about people and who you can truly trust, you know. And also that, you know, we all change with each chapter of our lives. Like, we're not the same person, like, at 20 as we are at 40. You know, that you're
God.
And, you know, that, so sometimes depending on where you're at in terms of your own life, and then where maybe, you know, some of your friends are at, that if you're not you don't have the same interests any longer. Now, some friendships last the test of time, even though people's lives might be infinitely different to each other. But there are other occasions then where, you know, your lives become so disparate and so different that, you know, you end up going one direction, and a particular friend or friends end up going another. But I think, as you said, it's very important that whatever friends that you do, you know, hold true to your heart in life, that you nurture those friendships and you make time for them, because we're all busy, we all have stuff going on, you know, but you really do have to kind of take the time to, you know, you don't necessarily have to be in people's ear every week, but you know, that you take the time, whether it's just, like you said, to sit down and have a cup of coffee, you know, even once every 6 months, like, you know, whatever, but that you're taking the time to touch base with someone.
And what you said, I think, is really important, that, you know, who we were when we were in our 20s is not who we are today. And, you know, I have a friend who has regrets of things that they did in their 20s. And they're still processing that. But I think it's important for people to really understand that we do change, and to accept that it's okay to have done things you regret younger in your life. And
because you're still learning.
Yeah.
You know, we're learning until we're 6 feet under. You know, I always think that's, you know, certainly I think it's important to remain a student for all of your life, you know, to always be open and receptive to learning new things. But you're right. You know, I mean, jeepers, we all made, like, probably our biggest mistakes, you know, in our teens and 20s and, like, even 30s. Like, you're just kind of, you're just learning the ropes. And that, you know, that's okay. It's about, you know, being able to reflect, but in a compassionate way, you know, not to be kind of have the stick out and giving yourself a bashing in your mind, you know.
Yeah, I feel that this person thinks that they really screwed up where they are in life today because of a few, they've pieced it together, even though they've kind of correlated all those happenings to be where they are today, even though that's just the path that they created. It's not really genuine. And I just feel sorry for that person. Like I'm trying to be as supportive as possible, but it's just that they're in a rut at the moment in life. And when you're in that space, all you're seeing is negative. And then that person is blaming decisions they made in their 20s for where they are today.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate and it's not healthy and it's not true. But there's a really interesting thing you talk about as well in the book is, dealing with the negative and rewiring. And it's, the brain is a muscle. And like we go to the gym and we try and work on our butt and our biceps and all that. You can actually train your brain. And it's amazing what they have discovered over the years now, what can be done. Yeah. Yeah. Because we naturally do think negative, don't we? It's kind of built into our DNA.
Yeah.
Back to
we have what's known as a negative bias. So we'll say, for example, a sea of 100 really positive comments, you'll see the one negative, and that's what you'll zone in on, and that's kind of that's the way we're wired as humans. So it does take quite a bit of work to rewire, because if you've been thinking in a certain way for X number of years of your life, then it's going to take, it's not going to happen overnight in terms of rewiring the brain. So the concept is called neuroplasticity, and there's been a ton of research that, has, particularly in recent years, that has taken place to show that, we can change our brains both in structure and in function. So, and we know that through looking at brain scans, brain images, and also through examining people who've experienced acquired brain injuries and seeing kind of how their brain maps, we'll say, pre-injury as distinct from post-injury. And even if you were to test them again a year later to see what happens in terms of, so essentially, what we place our attention on is what grows, So if we're placing our attention on the good stuff, on the positive stuff, that's the pathway in our brains that's going to be strengthened, as you said, just like a muscle.
Which goes into the importance of gratitude then, like trying to every day say, I'm grateful for these three things. Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely. And just really trying to, and that's one method of training your brain to kind of focus on the positive. But if you're to think sometimes, oftentimes nature can be our best teacher. And if you think about, I have mentioned actually, I can't remember the author, but I think the book is called As a Man Thinketh. But basically he likens it to a garden. If you want to have a healthy garden, you have to root out the weeds.
Yeah.
And, like really tend to your garden and don't allow it to kind of everything to become unwieldy and have no boundaries or no direction. You have to coax it along and water it and do all those. It's the same with our minds. So if we allow the negative stuff, to really take hold. And I always say to people, like, it's not that you can't stop the thoughts that enter your mind, but you have 100% control over how much airtime you give them.
Yeah.
So you can literally cut them off at inception, the way you would with the weeds in the garden, or you can choose to indulge them. And if you do that, then you're going to find yourself 2 hours later feeling terrible, and you'll be stuck in a really bad emotional place, So it's to notice the effect of when we actually give these thoughts airtime, we end up feeling a million times worse than when we started out. And again, as I said, that does take work, but it's absolutely possible to train our minds.
And it's going and getting the support. So like, going to a psychologist and talking it out and learning, kind of building up your own toolkit of things you can do that suit you.
Exactly.
To kind of tackle these things head on for yourself.
Yeah, exactly. And as you mentioned, like gratitude, that's got lots of research as well. Particularly in recent years that, and it's again, some people are like, oh God, why do I need to kind of be listing off like the good things that happened? Is that not a bit sort of childlike? But actually, it's amazing. Again, it's just really oftentimes it's the small things that add up and it's just one small thing. Obviously you have to be doing it with, you need to be doing it with other stuff as well. It's not just going to exist in isolation. You need to have, your life needs to kind of support level of positivity as well. But it is a method that you can use towards, pointing your mind in a positive direction and really focusing on what's working in my life as opposed to what's not working.
Okay, there's a few things in the book that I'd highlighted that I wanted to discuss as well. And I think this is really, really important for people. Pay attention to those who are persistently unavailable when times are tough, and equally those who appear to clap when things are good. Talk to me about that.
So oftentimes you'll hear people saying, pay attention to the people who are there when times are rough and when you're going through the mail and, when times are really hard. But equally, you need to pay attention to the people as well, who clap when you have a shining moment or a sparkling moment or whatever the case is, because that tells you an awful lot about who's truly in your corner. Because oftentimes, there can be an underlying level of almost contempt, envy, jealousy, things like that. If people haven't kind of worked through their own stuff, their own shadow side, they can end up projecting their own unfulfilled dreams onto you if they see you having, a celebratory moment and they're maybe stuck in a situation that they're not very happy in. Instead of dealing with that and turning the focus of attention back on themselves, they'll project all their old stuff onto you. So that's why, I think it's equally as important to pay attention to the people who clap for you. Like, the ones who do support you, whether it's, well, obviously first and foremost in real life, but also even on social media, people give away cues all the time, like who's the first to, or the last, as the case may be, to even like or comment or, be genuinely happy for you when you have moments like that.
What advice would you give people of things to look out for to know if someone is genuine or not? Like you talk about those friends that you can trust and they won't run off and tell it to other people. Are there kind of things to look out for?
I think instinct, actually, that's really where instinct comes in. Like, I think we all kind of know, we all have a sense deep down of who's truly in our corner. You get little kind of, I suppose, notice the small things, and if you get kind of a feeling within, pay attention to that. And if it's repeated, if you notice that somebody has a particular pattern of doing something, then, and you'd feel uncomfortable about it, that's an indication, it's an indicator. Everything in life kind of teaches us something. And I suppose all those little moments are an indication of, okay, there's something a bit strange there. And you might want to it might just be something that you might have a conversation with the person about and just say, I noticed, like in a non-confrontational way, was there a reason why? Or, now if you know somebody very well, you'll probably be able to reconcile it in your own mind and say, that person's probably busy or they haven't had a chance and I'm sure I'll hear from them tomorrow or I'll hear from them, whatever, But for people that maybe you're not so sure about, just kind of take your time is what I'd say in terms of who you allow in and who you truly trust, because I suppose you need to protect your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Talk to me about heartbreak then.
Oh, God. What do you want me to do? Is there something specific?
Well, you seem to have had an adventurous life anyways.
Yeah.
Different romance and stuff like that. And heartbreak can define us and make us change course, change our path. How much has it had an effect on you?
Yeah. I mean, I suppose I would always say, like, I've had really lovely relationships, like really nice, very genuine guys, like, anybody that I've gone out with. I can't say that I've ever like dated somebody who was like, not a nice person. I think I've been blessed with genuine people in my life, really. Both romantic partners and friendships, I have. It's probably become a little bit tricky in recent years because I'm in the world of online dating. So maybe that's what you're talking about. But so you just have to be a little bit more discerning, shall we say, when it comes to the online part, because like that, you don't always kind of get to what you see is not always what you get, you know, in person.
And again, it's working off instinct when you do meet those people, isn't it? To know it's genuine.
Yeah, but also kind of checking the facts, because sometimes the facts don't really match up to what you're getting in person, you know. So
have you come across some mad characters with the online dating?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I joked in the book that my next book will be on relationships, because it's just been, it's interesting to say the least, you know. But then, like, you kind of think, well, what's the alternative? Like, we're more limited, like, at the moment, in terms of, like, it's not like it was, you know, that you'd meet people more organically. Like, everything has gone to the kind of online space now, including dating. And again, like, you know, I've met some really great people as well online. But it's probably just a little bit trickier, because where before a lot of people, you know, may have met through work or through social events in the pub.
At the disco.
That's not really happening anymore, you know. And I think, I don't know, I've certainly noticed since COVID even, people are less they stay in their own little bubbles, even within a social context, like even in the pubs and stuff when you're out and about. You know, it definitely had a bit of a knock-on effect in terms of how we socialise or... But yeah, no, I'm a big believer in love. You know, I like, it's the most powerful emotion of all, and I've never kind of been put off by love, if that's what, you know, the overarching question that you're asking me. And I believe in love, you know, and I think it can be really complemented by, you know, having romantic love in your life, but equally it can work in the opposite way. So if you're with the wrong person, you know, if you're not matched, you know, in the right way, and, you know, if you're not matched on values, and there's lots of different things, you know.
Which brings me into one of your most popular chapters. When you were saying to me, you said, oh, there's a chapter 6 or something, I think it said, is the most popular chapter. And I remember opening a book going, oh, what's chapter 6? And it's, let's talk about sex.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was looking forward to, as I was going through the book, getting up to page 82 to get into this. And again, it wasn't at first what I thought it was going to be about. It got really deep, but on an understandable level. Talking about some really interesting things on chemistry, and there was the 4 chemical messenger systems: dopamine, serotonin, testosterone, and estrogen, and how people have a mix of different ones, and then it's kind of matching that up on what might work at the start in a relationship. You know, it's not that they don't work in a long-term relationship, but when, you know, children come into it, or careers or something, that those things adapt to the children or the careers, and it's different then in terms of a physical relationship and so on. And it's great that you wrote a chapter on it. My friends don't talk that much about intimacy within the relationship. And you know, that'd be on a male-to-male conversation. I don't know what the women are like. Maybe I shouldn't know either in terms of the conversations that you have over a glass of Prosecco. But is it an issue that you're seeing now? Because again, you know, people see a lot of content online where they think, like, you know, again, that's the way life should be, relationships should be. Is it coming into, we'll say, your place of work in terms of a discussion from people?
Yeah, I mean, I've had lots of referrals actually since the book to do with intimacy, referrals or romantic connections. And yeah, I mean, we all like to talk about relationships, but I suppose because, you know, so many people are at different stages in terms of whether they're with somebody, you know, for a long term, in the long term, or starting out, or maybe some people are on their second rodeo, whatever the case is. We're all at different stages, but we're all, again, as humans, we're always kind of motivated to look for an intimate connection. That's just how we're wired. And I suppose...
And we don't want to rewire that one now.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I suppose I always, like, what defines a romantic connection? Well, what defines it is that intimacy piece, is the sexual piece, you know. So, and I suppose that's why it can become really problematic for people who, you know, maybe are in long-term relationships, and, you know, if there's an absence of sexual intimacy, that it almost kind of becomes the elephant in the room, and that it is a really important part of, as I said, that's what essentially defines a romantic connection or an intimate connection. So it does warrant work, you know, but I think oftentimes people think that it's something that should come naturally. Yes, it might come naturally in the first 18 months to 2 years, because that's where the most kind of natural spark and chemistry comes in a relationship. After that, you probably have to work a bit harder, because, as you said, you know, along come like different complications, whether it's children or just life in general, you know, financial complications. You know, everything just gets a bit more complex as we, you know, move through life. And so it can be difficult to kind of make the time and make the space, you know, to have that romantic connection. But like, it's really important that you plan that time. You know, oftentimes people think, oh, it should be this and it should be this and it should be swinging from the chandeliers and it should be just instinctual. But actually, no, if you have a busy life, you actually have to plan date nights. You have to plan, you know, and to make time for your partner, you know. And I was reading a book recently actually by Doctors John and Julie Gottman, and they've done quite a bit of work on kind of the science of love and what works and what kind of defines the successful relationships as opposed to the unsuccessful ones. And they talk about the fundamental building blocks of trust, mutual respect, taking accountability when you're offside, kindness, you know, even things like complimenting your partner, things like that. Whereas a lot of the focus at the moment, online in particular, is, you know, oh, relationships won't work out because of people's different attachment styles, or because of their love languages, or because of abandonment wounds, or whatever the case is. But, while those things might have an impact, but actually the basic cornerstones of a relationship to work, and in order for you to feel motivated to even want to have intimacy, to want to have the sexual connection with your partner, that's founded on trust, you know, feeling safe, feeling that you can be vulnerable. Because if you think of sexual intimacy, we're never more vulnerable as we are in that space, you know. And so you have to feel safe with, and you have to feel like you're connected, you know, on an emotional level, in order for, you know, as I said, maybe not in the early stages, but certainly, you know, if you're planning on spending a bit longer into your life with somebody, then you have to, the kind of, as I said, the fundamentals need to be in place before the other stuff is truly going to work, you know, because it just won't stand the test of time. Yeah. And I suppose to not be afraid to be creative, to be just as creative in your sex life as you are about anything else. You know, that I think, particularly as Irish people, we can be very shy about talking about all of this. You know, it's a subject that we're not comfortable talking about.
Well, thank God you're doing all the talking here, not me.
But, you know, to make it kind of like, to allow that subject area, you know, to allow more ease of access with your partner, you know, and not necessarily, you don't have to be doing it over a cup of tea every morning, but that you have some opportunity to kind of talk about what's working or what's not working. And that's actually what fosters and what deepens the connection even more, you know. It's those, as you said, as you mentioned earlier on, it's those deep chats, not necessarily about intimacy, but deep chats on any level is actually what brings you closer to somebody, whether in a romantic connection or a friendship. If you think of over the years, when you'd have a real heart-to-heart with somebody, that's actually what deepens the connection, you know. But it is something that it warrants and it deserves the time that it deserves to be given, I guess, within a romantic connection. That it's one aspect. And as I said, for some couples, it's less important than other aspects. And that's fine, each to their own. But it is something, it can't be ignored, you know, because it's like I think I have a line in that chapter, sex complicates everything, you know, and not having sex complicates everything too, you know, so there's no getting away from it, you know.
You talk about, and you mentioned there as well, the languages of love, the 5 languages of love, which is something I kind of discovered during COVID as well, because the missus was out on the PUP, the pandemic unemployment thing. You know, her place of work was closed, and she was finding it very difficult at the time because there was no communication coming from the owners of the business, so they didn't know when the place would open and if it would ever open again, and it was all this uncertainty and so on. And I was having the complete opposite because we were regarded as essential workers in the company, so we were on the road doing videos non-stop and podcasts and all that all over the country.
Okay.
And I was coming home to a very upset wife. You know, she was going through her own trauma and stuff and trying to come to terms with everything. And I was learning about the 5 languages of love based on the fact that there was one day she was saying that her watch was broken or something, and I went off and I bought her a brand new watch online because there was no shops open at the time. And so when I gave it to her, I remember it was in the kitchen, and I gave it to her, and she looked at it and she said, "Oh, right." And she put it back down and she carried on doing whatever she was doing in the kitchen. And I just wanted to explode saying, you know, seriously, is there any appreciation? And I realized that definitely receiving gifts was not a language of love for her.
Okay.
So there's 5, if people aren't familiar with them. There's words of affirmation, there's quality time, there's receiving gifts, there's physical touch and acts of service. And I learned that my missus loves acts of service.
Acts of service, okay.
And I'd probably be more kind of words of affirmation.
Okay,
But it's good to know what are the key, not triggers, but the key kind of things someone sees as love towards them from their partner.
Absolutely, yeah. And to actually sit down and communicate that and take the time to ask each other, what is your love language?
Yeah. And I'm saving a fortune now. You know, you don't have to buy watches, iPhones, anything like that.
Absolutely. You just have to take out the bins more, Garry.
Exactly.
But even in terms of, you know, communication style, that, you know, it's about kind of tuning into what is somebody more, I think you mentioned in the earlier stages when we were talking about this, you know, is somebody more dopamine led? You know, if so, like they're going to kind of communicate in a very different style in terms of the way they're led. They'll be probably more impulsive, you know, whereas somebody who's more serotonin orientation, you know, they'll be more rule oriented, you know. So it's kind of just to realize that
I think it's worth breaking them down if you can. Those 4 things, just explain them to people, because I was clearly seeing then where I was and where other people I know are in them. So the dopamine you're saying is someone who's creative, spontaneous, curious, and so on. And then serotonin is, they're
more kind of like rule oriented, more kind of conscientious
and traditional.
Yes, yeah. Then somebody who's kind of testosterone. Now, bear in mind that we all have these 4 neurotransmitter systems, but we just lead from one side more so than another. Testosterone person, they'd be kind of more goal directed, you know, sort of quite direct, you know, kind of alpha, you know, your traditional kind of alpha male, if you like. That sounds a bit sexist, but that, you know where I'm coming from. And then what one am I missing?
Estrogen.
The estrogen, yeah. So that's, you know, quite sensitive in nature, quite romantic, you know. So, and again, it's kind of like realizing that what might attract you to somebody actually in the early stages can actually end up repulsing people as time goes on. So we'll say, for example, when you met somebody first, you might like the fact that they're maybe more sensitive or more emotional or whatever, even though you might be your classic alpha male, you know, so you're more testosterone led, for example. But then as time goes on, you know, again, if you don't stay on top of things and have an awareness of, well, that's the person that I married, or that's the person that I chose to be with, you know, that's my life partner, whatever the case is, that those very things that you liked in the early stages can actually become a source of irritation, you know?
Yeah. Because I've seen in relationships as well where they admire someone who's so focused on what they want, they're so goal orientated, they admire that.
Yeah.
But then later into a relationship, you know, they've had children.
Yeah.
And then this other person's still goal orientated and they're left kind of holding the kids saying, like, hello, there's a family here we have to raise.
Yeah.
And it is interesting because, you know, it's mad to think that what it might attract us in the initial stages of someone, which may not just be physical, but their personality might clash with us later in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose that's why it is so important to take that time to get to know somebody in the early stages, you know, like, because you can, ultimately avoid heartache further down the road. Because if you take the time to have those deep chats and to really, you know, try and figure out if you're aligned with somebody in terms of your values and kind of the direction that you're headed, and even, you know, personality factors, do they line up? Then you may save yourself, you know, down the road, because it can happen a lot, you know, when couples get together quite young. You know, some of them stand the test of time very successfully, others not so much.
And standing the test of time, is communication really key to that?
Massive.
Yeah.
Massive. Yeah. Yeah. It really is. And yeah, like I suppose, well, as a psychologist, of course, I'm going to, you know, always trying to encourage people to communicate. And again, it doesn't always come naturally to people. You know, they might have express love in a different way or whatever, and kind of don't really feel the need to communicate verbally in an open way. But it's really, really crucial in my mind in terms of like being able to work through stuff and being able to take ownership because that's a lot of the difficulties that arise between couples. It's because one is pointing the finger of blame to the other instead of both people individually taking responsibility for, you know, where they've mucked up, you know. And if you can develop that muscle again, you know, that's going to be, you know, a game changer when it comes to actually having those really difficult conversations and getting you through really difficult life moments, you know. And actually, on that note, the intimacy part, that's really important there as well. You know, that's you know, something that couples would describe, that if that remains intact, that's something that can really help them as well. Now, obviously, you still have to have the open conversations, but that intimacy, that physical intimacy part, again, because again, what does it do? It bonds you to that person, you know, so you can kind of feel like you can surmount whatever life obstacle is being thrown at you.
And I was reading recently that when the internal relationships are really strong, externally people perform very well independently in life then.
Yes,
you know?
Absolutely. So, which is kind of confusing in a sense, in that we live in such a society at the moment, in particular, like in the online space, there's kind of like this hyper independence, this sort of self-sufficiency, you know, having like airtight boundaries, you know, that's kind of what we're being told. But actually, when you have, as you say, when you have that kind of an interdependence as opposed to this, you know, constant self-reliance and constant independence, you know, but when you actually allow that space to open up between yourself and somebody else, you know, that actually, it's been shown through research studies as well, that oftentimes when people are in those, you know, very successful relationships, or relationships that they feel seen, that they feel safe, that actually gives them the confidence to then go out into the world, as you said, Garry, to accomplish great things and to be really daring, actually, in their external lives, because it's almost like, because they have that safety in their kind of own little personal bubble, it gives them that pep in their step, or that confidence to actually go out there and accomplish and achieve great things, you know, because they have somebody. It's like what's that expression, behind every great man or great woman, there's somebody, you know, significant. So it kind of ties into that, you know.
Yeah. It's having that cheerleader for you, really.
Yeah, and then also the opposite is also the case, you know. So if you think of the impact of having somebody who's not supportive in your life, that's going to completely diminish your confidence, completely diminish, you know, and any goals or dreams maybe that you've aspired towards yourself, they're not even on your radar when you're in that kind of situation, because you're literally in survival mode from day to day. You know, you're not thriving, you're surviving.
Yeah. Do you find it hard when you're in conversation with friends to bite your lip and say nothing when clearly the issue is screaming out here, but you don't want to turn into, you know, the psychologist at the table
off
for them?
Duty? Yeah. No, I often joke, actually. I say, no, I'm off duty at the moment, or you'll have to pay me if you want me to comment on that. But I suppose I kind of I would sort of sit back and kind of take things in, and unless somebody specifically asks me, what do you think, you know, I won't really kind of offer my tuppence worth, because I think sometimes, you know, well, I think firstly, I think it's good for people to just have a place and a space where they feel they can kind of openly air whatever it is. And oftentimes that's therapy enough, just to actually say whatever it is that's on your mind, and to have a listening ear. But also sometimes, you know, people actually don't want direction. They don't want advice, you know. So that's why I'd always wait for somebody to ask, you know, what do you think? Before I'd get involved.
You gave us a great piece of advice there a few weeks ago when we met, because we were talking about looking at another house, and just, you know, we were saying, you know, it's a lot more expensive than where we're living at the moment, but it's an ambition and it's a dream, and whatever way you just hit the nail on the head for us when you were saying, you know, is that the road you want to go down, where you're going to be putting a lot more financial pressure and stress on yourselves, which will put more pressure on your relationship? You know, can you not be content with what you have, and it allow you the space, the flexibility to do other things that you want to do in life? Because we love traveling, and it's just that conversation flipped it on its head. Like our whole mindset changed within a few hours of what was a goal there and then at the moment, and just our whole outlook has changed on things as well. We're very grateful, and we always were grateful for what we have, but it's all about just enjoying the adventure of life now. Yeah,
fantastic.
And doing more traveling and having more fun with doing things, because we're not putting additional financial stress
onto yourselves.
Which, you know, and the dream was of just having a nice big house to live in. We live in a house already, but it was just having a bigger house to live in. But then all that you lose with that.
That's it.
And as you said, the pressures that brings as well.
Yeah.
And really, what is the need for it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, that kind of internal pressure, but who's it for? Like, who are you trying to impress? You know, it's like, as long as you're happy and you're content and you have, you know, what you need, like, why the need for bigger and better? You know, oftentimes, like, we can have much happier lives with less, and actually we can do more, and we're in a happier frame of mind because we don't have all those burdens, you know, financial or otherwise, you know. And they do place huge pressures on people, and it's unnecessary a lot of the time. And I think it's just that, like that, as people progress through life, they think that they need to have bigger, better, faster, whatever the case is, you know. But actually, that's where you have to challenge yourself and sit back and say, well, actually, do we really, you know, just kind of question that narrative? Because again, sometimes it's limiting beliefs that we've accumulated over the years through talking to people, or maybe through listening to our parents, or whatever the case is, you know. But actually, when you actually sit back and you kind of examine those beliefs with a magnifying glass, do they still, you know, would they hold up in a court of law? Do they still hold true for us now? You know, and so well, I'm glad that I was able to help in some way.
I think it's interesting for people where they might perceive something as a goal and really, really go for it, and not actually really, really question deeply how important is this, and, you know, what could be the possible repercussions, and are they okay with that? What are the sacrifices that they're going to have to make? You know, sometimes we think if we found the goal, that's the solution and we just got to go for it headstrong.
Yeah.
But actually just go a little bit deeper on it. There was another thing I loved in the book as well, and it was, if you could invite, and we finished on this, 5 guests to dinner, who would they be? I loved this.
Okay.
So talk to us about this, because I think, I've always said before, and even when I started out in business, how important it was for me in the early years, and it still is today, even with the new aspects of the business, of the remodel and restructuring that we're looking to do, is just constantly just surround yourself with the right supportive people.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was a Jim Rohn actually who said that we're the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with, that we really become almost who we hang out with, and because of course we're going to adopt similar attitudes, similar beliefs, you essentially become very like the people that you spend the most time with. So I suppose the dinner conversations idea is, I had read it like years ago, I think, about, you'd hear people saying, or I read it somewhere, if you were to invite 5 guests to a dinner party, who would they be? And I suppose when I thought about it and reflected on it as a psychologist, I thought about, okay, so, it kind of calls to mind, firstly, the people that you immediately think of, they're obviously your nearest and dearest. But then there's also, like, 5 people is not that much. There's also then the people that you might feel obligated to invite, but don't necessarily want them to be at the table. And again, kind of to reevaluate those types of relationships, and, well, actually, could I keep those, those kinds of relationships more of, at an arm's length, as distinct from, really having them in my intimate circle, And I suppose then the piece that I added to that in the book was, well, okay, so pick 5 people in your existing life, but then also pick 5 people who, maybe are deceased or have passed. And really the idea with that was to help people to think about, like, if you're to reflect on who you'd like at that dinner table, are they people from the world of arts? Are they people from the world of film, from the world of writing, from the world of politics? Whatever. That tells us a lot about, well, it tells us a couple of things. It tells us, firstly, the types of people that we're more inclined towards. Yeah. So we generally like the people who are most like ourselves, and the people who kind of immediately spring to mind, they're telling you something, firstly, about your own character, where your interests are and the types of people that you're drawn to. But it's also telling you a little bit about your own, possibly, your own purpose or your own aspirations in life. So there could be a whole area that, if you're, say, for example, if you work in financial services, right? But the people that you'd like or aspire to having at that dinner table are all from the world of arts. That's telling you something very clearly about something that you're maybe ignoring in your own personality. There's obviously a whole creative side there that you're not tapping into, So it tells us a lot in terms of our own untapped potential and aspirations, as well as telling us about the people that we're most kind of inclined towards, or the people that we generally like the most, Yeah. So it's just a nice little one. And it tells you so much about people. In fact, I was on a date recently, and that guy, or the guy that I was on the date with, he asked me that question. Who would you...
okay.
Yeah. So
have you read the book?
It was obviously... No, you don't think so. But it was obviously, again, a way of tapping into, like, it tells you a lot about a person, who they'd choose to have. Did
you say to him, well, not you, Anna?
That'd be telling you, Garry.
To be continued.
Yeah, exactly.
No, it's a great exercise for people to do, maybe even after listening to this episode. Psychology with a Sparkle is the book by Dr. Denise O'Dwyer, and I highly recommend it. It's a great read. And again, it's not one of those books where you've read it once and that's it. It's a book really that you can keep dipping in and out of, because I think every time you'll read it with a fresh perspective again, different things within the book will resonate with you. So
thanks a million, Garry.
Thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much. I think you've sold it very well there.